Hello, and welcome to the Week Unspun. It is a weekly live look at the world through the eyes of PR professionals from around the world. My name is Farzana Baduel. I am in London.
I'm David Gallagher. I'm also in London.
And I'm Doug Downs in Canada's Rocky Mountains.
Now, I say this every week. What a week. What are we going to unpack today? It's going to be, what's
Happy
that?
Halloween!
Ooh. Okay, now, happy Halloween to all those witches like myself who are celebrating. Now, what are we going to unpack? Number one, Bill Gates. Who would have thunk it? My God, he has pivoted on climate change. Number two, we're going to look at layoffs. That's redundancies here in the United Kingdom at Amazon. And my favorite story, an Italian election turns personal as a former minister faces his ex-advisor at the polls. Your thoughts and comments are always welcome, so please comment away. David, I think you're first.
Yeah, thanks, and happy Halloween to everyone. I woke up, I think it was Tuesday, maybe it was Wednesday, but I woke up to a New York Times story. This is the Bill Gates pivot on climate change. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. And I kind of braced myself for the worst. By the way, we could do a whole show, I think, on how we first wake up to the news. And I do like the New York Times app, but I digress. Anyway, back to Bill Gates. It turns out he wasn't really reversing himself on climate change, but he was suggesting that maybe this doomsday alarmism, is putting too much emphasis on actions like reducing carbon emissions and not enough on reducing human suffering, especially from poverty and illness. So his memo, he posted on his website, was called Some Tough Truths. And maybe if we could kind of show that slide, it lists some of the things he thinks we need to think about. I got to say, I have mixed feelings about this. You may too. On the one hand, the "we're all going to die" messaging isn't really working in most cases, whether it's true or not. And I think there is an argument to be made for moving the conversation away from the stick and towards the carrot of clean energy and innovation, and maybe some new metrics beyond temperature reductions. On the other hand, we humans don't do nuance very well. And I worry that his words may be used to justify or camouflage some walk-back commitments from corporates and others. And as soon as that thought entered my mind, I saw the inevitable, I guess I call it a truth from President Trump. We can show that. Really just sort of jumping to some kind of false conclusion. So I was left kind of trying to figure out what I think about this, as I usually do when I'm in over my head, which is often I call a friend. So this time I called Chris Pratt. He's head of sustainability and social impact at the global agency Burson. And I thought he had some good words to offer on this, and I'll ask you guys for reaction after the fact. But Emil, if you don't mind showing that video from Chris, please.
I wanted to offer a perspective on Bill Gates, who this week set out a new position on climate action and climate finance. I view this as an attempt to redefine the middle ground, recognizing that both extremes are really a little too dogmatic and ideologically motivated. And so it's an important move, but I do worry that this is a shift away from being led by the science, which has been such a foundation stone for net zero messaging. And I think why? Because it's particularly hard to argue with the fact of science, and those that have historically been relatively easily labelled as denialists or arguing for delaying action. I think as far as communications is concerned, the pivot to benefits other than a habitable planet began a while ago. So we've seen narratives around resilience, independence, economic arguments, and protection of nature and people, most at risk of harm, becoming far more prominent. The good news is that what we're seeing is, from a corporate perspective, it hasn't stopped climate action. Whilst it's changed the narrative, and the channels and the volume of engagement have changed, we are still seeing action. I think the bigger question for the next few years is whether this change in political air cover and the shift in narrative from the likes of Bill Gates will lead to a wider scaling back of ambition among corporates and individuals, and what role communicators really have in shaping that for better or worse. Look forward to hearing the discussion.
Well, I'll say here, thanks, Chris. This sparked a big conversation in a group chat that he and I are both part of, and he is my go-to guy when it comes to any questions on sustainability and importantly how sustainability is communicated. But I guess a question for you both: do you think this will change the way corporate communicators in particular talk about climate change? and will it change the action of the companies, regardless of how they talk about it?
Well,
Doug, sorry, Farzana.
yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the question is it Bill Gates really reframing it in terms of, moving away from this sort of doomsday scenario to something a bit more optimistic, a bit more actually, let's focus on solutions, or is it actually a U-turn? And I think what you had a lot of people that felt that actually he was in a way betraying the climate change sort of movement by, and I think a lot of people didn't actually read his statement, but what they saw was actually President Trump's tweet saying you are wrong. So I think the first issue is that we live in quite a sort of a dirty information ecosystem where some people could misconstrue what he said in terms of him reframing it. They may actually think he's done an actual U-turn, which is what was the gap between what he said and what President Trump alluded to in his tweet. So I think that's the first issue. I think because it's become such a polarized debate, those people who already have entrenched views on either side are just going to reinforce and utilize his position and his latest reframing to sort of further their own agenda. So I think that will be very interesting. But I also think what's quite interesting is that had he come out with this last year, he would have had a lot more negativity than now, because you've seen a lot of other companies walk back on their ESG credentials. And so what happens with human behavior is actually it's always the first few companies that have done it that get that backlash. And then when everybody else sort of walks back, people think, well, actually, we're used to it by now. So I think it's quite interesting, the timing.
Yeah, and it's before COP next week too. The timing is interesting there. Maybe that's where you were going, Doug. But sorry.
My take is that we've long known that we fatigue under alarmism, and alarmism has been happening for a long time here. Gates is just betting that optimism has better staying power. The problem to me is credibility and context. When the United Nations says devastation and Gates says we'll survive, it's the messenger that's defining the meaning. To some, he's the calm technocrat. To others, the billionaire who is softening the urgency. And that's the paradox here. The same words sound either pragmatic or complacent, depending on who says them and who's listening. And you can see that split in real time. I read the article in The Guardian. It's framing Gates as downplaying climate risk. Fox News, which, sorry, I do check because I'm a balanced reporter, calls it a refreshing reality check. Same quote, opposite headlines. And that's where communicators have to think like architects, designing messages that anticipate distortion and still hold their shape. Whether you agree with Gates or not, he's reminding us that if our message doesn't move people to act, maybe it's not the facts that need to change, it's how we tell the story.
Yeah, well said. Well, we could probably had the whole show on this, but I know, Doug, you had mentioned early in the week, you picked up on the Amazon layoffs and how that's been framed. And I think that's probably the next big story in communications this week.
Yeah, let's unpack the Amazon story. Earlier this week, Amazon confirmed it's going to cut 14,000 corporate roles worldwide, actually, part of what CEO Andy Jassy is calling an effort to make the company leaner, faster. I want to look at this from two perspectives. One is how Amazon messaged and framed this. The other is how AI is becoming the story itself. Talk about Halloween scary. The message to staff was carefully framed, not about financial trouble, but about streamlining layers, increasing ownership, and preparing for an AI-driven future. In classic Amazon fashion, the communication positioned a difficult announcement as a bold act of reinvention. It's a reminder to communications professionals that tone, timing, and framing can shape how even the hardest corporate news is received, turning what could read as a corporate setback into a story of strategic renewal. But when you look closer, and the subtext becomes even more relevant to our industry in PR, Amazon's statement makes artificial intelligence the rationale for this restructuring, calling it the most transformative technology since the internet. That's where public relations pros are paying attention. If AI is reshaping how organizations justify change, it's also reshaping how we communicate it. The tools we use, the narratives we build, and even the roles inside our own agencies are all being redefined. This isn't just Amazon's story. It's a glimpse of the future that we're all getting ready for.
You want to go first, Farzana? I do have some thoughts on this, but I don't want to crowd you out.
Yeah, sure. I mean, First of all, it made me think about during COVID, Airbnb had to make a significant number of layoffs, and they ended up, I think the CEO, is it Brian Chesky? He wrote the most incredible letter that of course goes public, and it just was a masterclass in terms of empathy and leadership. And instead of receiving hate for the huge amounts of layoffs, he actually received a lot of positivity. And actually, his letter, for those people who want to Google CEO Brian Chesky, letter to employees for redundancies, that letter became a case study in PR world in terms of how to deliver good news in a human way. Now, looking at Amazon, I think that using AI, and of course, a lot of organizations are in a similar boat, is the bogeyman is already there for redundancies. It's AI. And previously companies would be really worried about talking about redundancies because, does it mean that their business is failing, for instance? But now actually AI gives a cover to a lot of companies, because then it sort of helps in terms of their positioning as, we are at the forefront of this emerging technology. It gives reassuring signals to stakeholders such as shareholders, investors, etc. And so, and also you have to think about the employer brand. Amazon isn't really considered a cuddly sort of employer brand, and so it's not like so it's not, the expectations aren't there that Amazon is going to really be thinking about talent welfare. They've already been in the news for for a lot of sort of negative treatment of employees. So I think it's also about the gap between the employer brand and how they behave. And so when people see these layoffs, they just think, well, it's business as usual for Amazon. It's always been about the bottom line. Nothing new here. Let's jog on.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine too many companies laying off 14,000 people, and the reviews of the communications coming out pretty positively. And that's kind of what I've seen. Like you guys, I subscribe to a lot of different newsletters, and most of the feedback on how Amazon has handled this has been pretty complimentary. And I guess, to your point, Doug and Farzana, it seemed like it was framed for investors and maybe their business partners. And AI readiness is very popular with both. I suspect some of the changes were actually tied at least as much to robots and automation, which tend to be a little less positive. And so you wrap it all under this AI technology. It seems like this is good for the future. And in fact, AI stock kind of bounced a little bit after this. I think the investor community saw it well. President Trump did not respond to this one, at least not directly. And that's kind of another thing we almost have to think about every time we make an announcement, who's going to respond. But it's also a tale of two cities, because if you look at the social media feeds from employees, especially on TikTok, but also on LinkedIn and others, very different story. A lot of employees, for understandable reasons, weren't happy with the content of the communications, the style of the communications, the timing, or the phasing, and that's a different storyline coming through. I think the message for communicators is going to be, if the investors are happy and the business partners are happy, we can probably ride out the storm with employees. I don't know if that's the right thing, but I think that's probably going to be the takeaway from this.
Well said.
Well, I want to just, while we have a moment, just compliment you on your show you did this week. And I do say this a lot, but I do think you have a great program where you go deep on topics that I think have some evergreen vitality to the conversations we're trying to have. And this conversation you had with Tina McCorkindale from the Institute of PR on sycophancy and AI, I thought was just really well done. And I did send you kind of a funny video, which I didn't get loaded up.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was a great conversation. I just want to compliment you on that, and any other thoughts you had on that exchange with her.
Well, just the generic, she blogged about it, and the basic note is, hey, when you're using generative AI, I'll pick ChatGPT. Does it compliment you an awful lot? Like I said, that's a great idea. And even if you completely no, you got it all wrong, generative AI will come back and say, you're right, that needs a rethink. It's just too complimentary. After I looked up sycophancy in the dictionary to understand what it meant, we interviewed Tina, and this is a clip of how it went.
The problem is that sometimes your ideas maybe aren't great, and it's telling you they are to engage in a face-saving activity. So that's where, and it also depends on the platform. Some platforms are more sycophantic than others. But yes, and there's a great episode of The Daily that kind of spurred this idea for me. And it was about this gentleman who thought he had like solved some quantum math issue and was going to quit his job. And he had all his friends on board, and they were like, "You are the smartest person of the world. You should quit your job." He wasn't even like a mathematician. And when he did send it in before he was going to do this, they were like, "No, this is totally wrong. Everything about this is wrong." But the ChatGPT was like, you should definitely quit your job.
Farzana, I thought you were amazing in that whole interview. You were just fantastic, right on cue.
Do you know what? I absolutely love ChatGPT, and I realize I love it because it tells me what I want to hear, and it is quite a slippery slope because actually you start creating your own echo chamber, even more dangerous than social media bubbles. And so we're walking around our social media bubbles telling us the world is as we see it. We then use ChatGPT and other sort of LLMs telling us how marvelous we are. And are we going to end up becoming these fragile creatures that can't sort of be open to dissenting voices and views? And that already is posing a problem for society with cancel culture and polarization.
Well, so unrelated to the episode, but related to the topic of the episode, my business, Fulgate, we just reached our 1-year anniversary, and I thought we should probably update our website. So I asked ChatGPT, what should I do to update the website? And it said, you got to have an FAQ section. Otherwise, the other machines can't read anything about your website. I said, okay, well, what should the questions be? So it gave me a list of questions, and they're all pretty basic. I said, okay, those are good. What should the answers be? And it gave me some answers, and I loved the answers until I read some of them. I was like, well, that's not actually true. And I would be very happy if that was true, but that's not true either. But I found myself really liking the answers. And I don't know if that's actually the way we should be using artificial intelligence. But again, great show. So
it's so interesting the AI has been designed that way, right? Because it's designed by humans ultimately. And to understand you pay credit or give compliment to a human in order to keep them listening and keep them using. It's probably good psychology.
Yep, 100%. All right, so Farzana, you've been talking about this story since Monday. So and I wanted you to do a Halloween story, and you said this was better. So let's lay it on us.
Okay, so I'm obsessed with Italy and I'm obsessed with Italians, so much so I married one. Now, I have always been fascinated by their culture. My family from Pakistan, my husband's family are Italian. And so my daughter goes around, I'm half Italian. Oh, I'm half Pakistani. And I've always been fascinated with people's responses for countries. And you have this whole sort of thinking in terms of branding of country of origin. So for instance, if I said to you, buy this automotive product, it was made in Germany, people would naturally lean in. If I said, buy this meditation app, it was created in India, people would lean in. So you have this country of this country of origin that actually brings a value or detracts from value. And how a country sort of, what news stories come out of that country shapes that sort of halo, which has an impact upon trade and all other areas. Now, going back to Italy, so I don't really follow Italian politics. And all of a sudden in last year, I started coming across this, the culture minister back then, he was a junior culture minister called sort of Vittorio Salvi. And he was accused of possessing and exhibiting a stolen 17th century painting. I thought, gosh, only Italians would have a culture minister that would actually steal a 17th century painting. Most of, the rest of us sort of Brits would, kind of be happy to, stealing just pure hard cash. But, a 17th century, and it sort of made me laugh. And some people say, oh, that's so Italian, when they see in the comments. And then there was another story that broke between another culture minister called San Giuliano. And can we have some lovely photos of San Giuliano? And it turned out that San Giuliano, apart from being incredibly busy as a culture minister, a married culture minister, also had an advisor, this lady called Boccia. And he ended up, according to her, embarking upon an affair. He then denied it. Ooh. She then became this influencer and she was referred as this assassin because what she did, she had these glasses that took pictures of all the official documents and she kept it. So when her lover no longer played ball with her, and she then became very angry, and so she started on her social media releasing policy documents. And she used PR techniques. She kept her powder dry. She didn't dump everything at the same time. She understood that to really create damage, and this is what people learn in opposition research in politics, is you've got to do that drip, 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 drip feed. So she was dripping all of these sort of, official documents. And in the beginning, his party was like, no, it's just a personal matter. But of course, she started dumping all of these policy documents. And then his position was no longer tenable. He then resigned, left. But now what we have is the gift that keeps on giving, the story. So now what you have is he has decided to go for a regional seat, contest a regional seat in Campania. Guess who is his opposition? Maria Boccia. Maria Rosario Boccia. So now what I want to ask you two gentlemen is, how do you deal with a PR issue like that when your opposition is someone that knows you a little bit too well?
I want to hear the debates, right?
Yeah, they're going to be spectacular.
Just be juicy. Do you want to go first, David, or me?
I don't know if I've got a strategy. I do have a notebook where I write down ideas to take to Netflix, and this has got to be a Netflix. So if you want to help me develop the plot line, I think it's great. I don't know what the PR angle is on this, other than he might think about dropping out of the race. That would probably be my advice.
Maybe. So I saw two different narratives. I think Sangiuliano, correct me if I'm off.
Nicely done.
I think his narrative is, I've moved on, I'm credible again. And Boccia, her narrative is, you tried to write me out of the story, but here I am headlining my own story. Classic case of controversy, turning controversy into visibility, where the campaign trail doubles as a redemption tour. And let's be honest, for the press, this isn't politics, right? It's prestige reality TV in Viva Italy. Each soundbite becomes a plot twist. Each public appearance is a new episode. Welcome to the Italian X-Files, everyone. Nothing says healthy democracy like two X's fighting over who gets custody of the electorate.
This was a long wind up for you to deliver that line, wasn't it, Doug? That was.
I teed it up. That's comedy 101, man. Lead into it, tee it up.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Farzana.
Yeah, we just got a lovely comment from Sebastio Domingos. Hi, guys. Sebastio from Kula Digital Marketing Agency based in South Africa, and just sending us some love. So thank you so much. Sending it straight back.
Sebastio.
That's kind, and I meant to ask in the beginning. Any comments are always welcome, and we try to bring them onto the onto the screen. And I want to say thank you to the people who bother to tune in and watch this live conversation. It's fun for the three of us and worth it just for that. But it is nice to know that there are people out there. But we do make the recordings available on YouTube, on my LinkedIn feed, and on a couple other channels. And the audiences are nicely growing. So thank you very much for those that either tune in live or that bother to download, and please give them a share and a like. Next week, just looking ahead, I think we're going to have to wing it again without Farzana, who will be in Italy, right? Unrelated to this story. So we are looking at another mailbag episode. That was pretty popular last time. We weren't able to get to everything that was submitted, so we're working on kind of refining that. And I don't know if we're going to be able to open up the questions to everything. But one thing I'm curious about, and sorry to spring this on you guys, but the question I've been thinking about is, can immigration, which is at the center of so many policy conversations around the world, can it be reframed, rebranded into some other way of conversation, and maybe one that's less polarizing and less alienating? So if you're thinking you want to contribute something, you're not sure what you want to ask, you have a point of view on that would be great. But we're also always open to comments on the show, things that we talked about in the past that you didn't get a chance to address, or any other questions or comments you'd like to make. Please send it to me on LinkedIn. I think it's probably the best way to do it, and we'll look forward to that.
Okay, I guess we're getting to the last piece here. That all the talk right now in Canada is the Toronto Blue Jays. In the World Series, we're leading the Los Angeles Dodgers 3-2. They just played 3 games in LA. And you know how all the stars come out to Dodger Stadium. I mean, Mary Hart is there. So many stars. Well, I want to show you a photograph of 2 of the well-known celebrities. Well, there's Meghan Markle and there's Do I say Prince Harry, or is that the official term, Prince Harry, or has he lost that title? Like
I think it's the
like
other
Andrew?
prince who lost the title, but I'm not
Okay,
sure.
right. Okay, that's a whole. But they're wearing LA Dodgers caps. You can see how this went over on social media. I mean, your dad is literally Canada's head of state. Talk about being off-brand. Emily, come back to me on photo here. This is Canadian money, all right? Hey, Harry, your grandmother's literally on our money, dude. And yet you're wearing an LA Dodgers cap? So just to me, off-brand. Reactions from, I guess I'll go first to you, Farzana.
Well, maybe he's been briefed by our Department of International Trade as a ploy to reduce our tariffs.
Oh, that is spin. We're supposed to unspin it. My God.
I think LA is their home now, and I think they just made a bold branded statement about that. But actually, a statement that probably isn't reflecting most of Americans right now in terms of who people are really rooting for in this World Series.
They ain't representing the USA there with that hat. No way.
That's a whole other story about whether the World Series is actually a World Series when baseball isn't played everywhere in the world. So I was glad to see teams from 2 different countries playing in this one, and I am rooting for Toronto, Doug.
Go Blue Jays. Game 6 could be the World Series later tonight. That's kind of overnight UK time, but later tonight, that could be it. Okay, final thought for the day. I'm going to turn to... Oh, go ahead.
Before you do, we just have a lovely comment from one of my favorite people, Anne-Marie. She's just clarifying that he is a prince, so do refer to him,
Thank you,
please.
Prince Harry. Does he deserve wearing a Dodgers cap when your grandmother is on our money?
Well, Anne-Marie says he was sitting in the Dodgers box, so what should he have done? It's just
He's a
good
prince
manners.
of a guy from a Canadian perspective. That's all I'm saying. Final thought from Marjorie Pay Hinckley, quote, home is where you are loved the most and act the worst. That's all the time we have today. Special thanks, as always, to our Gold Star producers, Emily Page, David Olajidi, and special credit today to Bella Baduel. Thank you, Bella. The Week Unspun is a co-production of Kurz and Public Relations, Folgate Advisors, and Stories and Strategies. See ya next week. Happy Halloween. Ooh.